Moving. With pleasure. Moving. Like a bullet. Point away. Steady. Let loose. Fire. With pleasure. Moving. Like a bullet. Point away. Moving. With pleasure. Point away. Like a bullet. Taking aim. With pleasure. Moving. With pleasure. Moving. With pleasure. Point away. Steady. Like a bullet. Point away. Like a bullet. With pleasure. Point and shoot. Fire! Point away. Moving. With pleasure. Point and shoot. In my sights. Shoot! With pleasure. Moving. Steady. Point away. Point and shoot. Point away. Like a bullet. Moving. Shoot! Point away. With pleasure. In my sights. Point and shoot. With pleasure. Fire when ready. Moving. Attack! Fire when ready. In my sights. Attack! Point and shoot. With pleasure. Point and shoot. Moving like a bullet. With pleasure. Let loose! Like a bullet. Point away. With pleasure. Like a bullet. With pleasure. Point away. In my sights. Point away. Steady. With pleasure. Attack! Point and shoot. With pleasure. Like a bullet. Point and shoot. Steady. With pleasure. Point and shoot. With pleasure. In my sights. With pleasure. In my sights. Like a bullet. Shoot! Point and shoot. In my sights. With pleasure. Point and shoot. Point away. Fire! Taking aim. In my sights. Point away. With pleasure. Point and shoot. Point away. Fire! Moving. Like a bullet. With pleasure. In my sights. Point away. Moving. In my sights. Point away. Moving. With pleasure. Like a bullet. Taking aim. With pleasure. Point and shoot. With pleasure. Point the way. Moving. Point the way. With pleasure. Point and shoot. Attack! Moving. With pleasure. Point and shoot. Moving. Like a bullet. Let loose! With pleasure. Moving. With pleasure. Point and shoot. In my sights. With pleasure. Point the way. In my sights. Moving. Point the way. In my sights. Steady. Attack! Moving like a bullet. Fire! With pleasure. Taking aim. In my sights. Point the way. Moving like a bullet. Point the way. Steady. Like a bullet. Moving like a bullet. Attack! Point the way. With pleasure. Like a bullet. With pleasure. Like a bullet. Moving like a bullet. Shoot! Point the way. Moving like a bullet. Taking aim. Steady. Point and shoot. Point the way. Point and shoot. With pleasure. Shoot! Like a bullet. Point the way. Steady. Attack! Let loose! Taking aim. Moving. Like a bullet. Moving like a bullet. With pleasure. Point the way. Moving with pleasure. Moving like a bullet. Point the way. Moving in my sights like a bullet. Steady. Fire! Attack! Fire when ready. Steady. Attack! Steady. Attack! Point the way. With pleasure. Point and... With pleasure. Point and shoot. In my sights. Moving. With pleasure. Point and shoot. Point the way. Moving. With pleasure. Point and shoot. With pleasure. Moving. Point and shoot. Moving like a bullet. Point the way. In my sights with pleasure. Shoot! Point and shoot. Moving like a bullet. with pleasure. In my sights, with pleasure. Point the way, like a bullet, with pleasure. Moving, attack, taking aim. Point and shoot. Point the way, with pleasure. Like a bullet. Moving, like a bullet. With pleasure, like a bullet. Moving, like a bullet. Point the way, with pleasure. Point and shoot. Attack! In my sights. Steady, attack! Point the way. Let loose! In my sights. With pleasure. Point and shoot. Like a bullet. Point the way. With pleasure. Moving. Like a bullet. Moving. With pleasure. Moving like a bullet. Point the way. Moving with pleasure. Point and shoot with pleasure. Like a bullet. Point the way. Moving in my sights like a bullet. Moving. Shoot! Like a bullet with pleasure. Moving. Steady. Attack! Point and shoot. Point the way. Moving like a bullet with pleasure. Moving like a bullet. Fire when ready. With pleasure. Moving with pleasure. Moving. Attack! Taking aim. Point and shoot. Steady. Taking aim. Like a bullet. Challenge. Point the way with pleasure. Point the way. In my sights like a bullet. Moving. Attack! Fire! With pleasure. Point the way with pleasure. Let loose! Point and shoot. Taking aim. Like a bullet. With pleasure. Moving. Steady. Point and shoot. Moving like a bullet. In my sights, point the way. Like a bullet. With pleasure. Shoot! Point and shoot. Taking aim. Moving with pleasure. In my sights. Steady. Fire! Steady. Point the way like a bullet. Point the way. With pleasure. Moving like a bullet. Moving like a bullet. Moving like a bullet. With pleasure. In my sights, point and shoot. Moving, point and shoot. In my sights. Point and shoot. Let loose! Moving. Like a bullet. Point and shoot. Like a bullet. Point away. Like a bullet.
You see that coming?
Point away. Moving. Point away. Moving. Point and shoot. Point away. Moving. Point away. Taking aim. Moving. Let loose! Fire when ready. Like a bullet. Moving. In my sights. Fire! Like a bullet. Moving. Like a bullet. Moving with pleasure. Let loose! Attack!
Challenge.
Point and shoot. With pleasure. Point and shoot. Like a bullet. Point away. Moving. Fire! Fire when ready. Point away with pleasure. Point and shoot. Moving like a bullet. Point and shoot. Let loose! In my sights. Point away. In my sights. Moving. Point away. With pleasure. Point away. In my sights. Point away. With pleasure. Point and shoot. In my sights. Moving. Like a bullet. With pleasure. Steady. Point away. Point and shoot. Like a bullet. With pleasure. Like a bullet. Point away. With pleasure. Point and shoot. Like a bullet. With pleasure. Attack! Point and shoot. Let loose! With pleasure. Point away. With pleasure. Point and shoot like a bullet. Point away. Moving with pleasure like a bullet. Attack! Let loose! Steady. Shoot! Attack! Let loose! With pleasure.
How could we lose?
In my sights. Moving. With pleasure. Moving. In my sights. With pleasure. Like a bullet. With pleasure. Like a bullet. With pleasure. In my sights. Moving. Point away. With pleasure. Point and shoot. Like a bullet. With pleasure. Point and shoot. In my sights, like a bullet. Moving. like a bullet. Point and shoot. Steady. With pleasure. Moving with pleasure. Moving like a bullet. Let loose! With pleasure. Moving with pleasure. Point and shoot. With pleasure, like a bullet. Point and shoot. Fire like a bullet. Steady. With pleasure. Point and shoot. Point the way. Attack! Like a bullet. Point and shoot. Moving like a bullet. Moving. In my sights. Let loose! Attack! Let loose!
Fine.
Point the way. With pleasure. Point and shoot. With pleasure. Moving. Point the way. Eat lead. Fire! With pleasure. Moving. Attack! Like a bullet. In my sights. With pleasure. In my sights. Moving with pleasure. Point and shoot. Moving like a bullet. Fire! With pleasure. Moving. Attack! In my sights. Moving. In my sights. Steady. Attack! Point and shoot. Moving. Steady. Point the way. Moving like a bullet. Point the way like a bullet. Point the way. With pleasure. Point the way with pleasure. Attack! Fire! Like a bullet. Point the way with pleasure. Point and shoot like a bullet. Shoot! Steady. Moving like a bullet. Attack! With pleasure. Point and shoot. Moving. Fire! Let loose! In my sights like a bullet. Moving with pleasure. Point and shoot. Moving. Point and shoot. Fire when ready. Moving like a bullet. Point the way. In my sights. Moving like a bullet. Let loose with pleasure. Eat lead.
Yes, yes, I'm going. Yes, yes.
Point and shoot with pleasure. In my sights. Fire when ready. Point and shoot. Taking aim. In my sights. Moving like a bullet. Moving. Steady. With pleasure. Point and shoot like a bullet. Attack! Point the way in my sights like a bullet. Let loose! Too easy. Point and shoot with pleasure. Point the way. Fire when ready.
I'm going!
With pleasure. Point and shoot with pleasure. Moving. Attack! Like a bullet. Point and shoot. Taking aim in my sights. Moving. In my sights. Moving. Fire! Let loose! Point and shoot like a bullet. With pleasure. In my sights. Fire! Moving. Let loose! In my sights. Moving. With pleasure. Point and shoot with pleasure. Attack! Point the way.
Did you see that coming?
With pleasure. Moving. Point the way. Moving. Let loose! Point and shoot. Moving. Steady. Point and shoot. Attack! Let loose! Moving. With pleasure. Point and shoot. Steady. With pleasure. Moving like a bullet. Point the way. With pleasure. Point and shoot. Point the way. With pleasure. Attack! In my sights.
Yes, yes!
Point the way. Moving like a bullet. Steady. Too easy. my sights. Moving with pleasure. Taking aim. Point and shoot with pleasure. Let loose!
All is lost.